Hello everyone, this is Colin once again. I'm continuing the Robert Spencer book review on The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. I know it's been a long time, I apologize for the wait. I'm actually jumping out of order. If you've noticed the other videos, I last left at chapter 5, skipping chapter 6 and going to chapter 7. Why am I doing this? Well, I'm making this video at 1:17 a.m. and I have so many notes for chapter 6 that I really don't have the energy to take that apart one sentence at a time. But I feel like chapter 7 is easy enough to refute, and so I'm doing it right now. Basically, the chapter is called How Allah Killed Science. And Spencer spends his entire time, this is how useless of information he tries to bring forward. He cannot attack Islam anymore, as I've shown in the first 5 chapters, so he has to, instead of attacking the religion, he really kind of goes after the culture, which he seems to not understand that Islam is not just an Arabic culture. Of course, Arabic culture has a huge factor in it. There are other cultures that do and did flourish under the Islamic empires. But he seems to ignore that. He starts with a section called What About Art and Music? And he gives credit to where credit is due. He does mention Rumi, 1001 Nights, and the other Persian poets. But then after he gives this credit, I'll quote him, page 88, he says, "But what about Islamic achievements in other artistic fields? Where are the Muslim Beethovens? Or Michelangelo's? Where can one listen to the Islamic equivalent of Mozart's 20th Piano Concerto, or savor the Islamic Mona Lisa or Pieta?" Now, this is probably, and I'm going to say this as kindly as I can, the dumbest argument I have ever heard in my life. Now, why do I say that? Well, because you could apply what he just said to pretty much any other culture. Where is the Australian Aborigines equivalent of Mozart? You know, where is Chile's Pieta? You know, this is one of the examples of really stupid, an argument that's just a complete fallacy, in my opinion. What's his point here? What is he trying to say? That just because the Islamic empires never had someone who was the equivalent of Michelangelo or Da Vinci, that they're any less in the eyes of humanity? Well, that really marginalizes a huge percentage of the world, except for the white. Oh, that's right, the white European Christians. I see. Okay, well, moving on. He then cites a hadith, which he does a terrible job of citing, and I don't even know where he begins his quotations here. It's a hadith about the day of resurrection, and that basically the day of judgment will be when songstresses and musical instruments appear and wine is held to be lawful. He's giving a sign for the day of judgment, not in general, which, I mean, we can make a different video on musical instruments in Islam. There are many different opinions of instruments in Islam, which Robert Spencer fails to recognize in his book. Of course, he's overly generalizing. That's his way of writing. He doesn't acknowledge that there are many different opinions of musical instruments in Islamic jurisprudence and theology. But then he quotes Ayatollah Khomeini, which I think is very funny. You know, he quotes Khomeini talking about the evils of music. Well, I could quote you back in the 1950s, very conservative Christians that said rock and roll and Elvis Presley was the devil. Does that make them right? You know, this is him cherry-picking sources. And I love how he quotes the Sufi poets in the beginning about their poetry, but he doesn't quote them here defending music. One of Rumi's most famous poems was the beauty of the music of the flute. You know, he doesn't quote Rumi there, but he quotes or he mentions them earlier on for their poetry, but not of their values of music. Maybe he doesn't know Sufis are Muslims. I don't know. Then he goes on to attack, basically, he says the PC myth, Islam was once the foundation of a great culture and scientific flowering. And I won't even get into the details, I mean, if you want me to, that's fine, but he basically tries to say that Muslims did not create, these famous Muslims like Averroes and and whatnot, were not responsible for the creation of their findings, but were merely building on the Greeks and things like this. Well, duh. I mean, none of these Muslims ever claimed to be the founders of their exact a subject. There are, however, some Muslims that do need to be given credit. For an example, there is Jabir ibn Hayyan, who is considered the father of chemistry. He died in 803 CE. There are other Muslims who are considered the father of blank, their subject. But many of them are just Muslims who expanded upon their subjects, like algebra and other subjects such as this. But Robert Spencer tries to say that Muslims are saying, no, we created these subjects. That's not what the Muslims claim. They claim that under their Islamic empire, there was a lot of thinking going on, a lot of advancement in these subjects, not like what was going on in the Dark Ages in Europe, where a lot of ignorance and basically the church condemning such practices were widespread. He also tries to attack the fact that the Byzantines' model of architecture, basically he's trying to say the Muslims stole architecture from the Byzantines, but any art history professor will tell you that both cultures were borrowing from each other because they were contemporaries of each other, which is why you see certain Islamic architecture have European architecture, and then you have certain Byzantium and European architecture that have the onion-shaped arches, and they're borrowing from the Islamic Empire. Both borrowed from each other as contemporaries. But Spencer does not talk about this. He tries to play it off the Muslims hijacked these certain architectures. And I guess I'm going to have to make this into 2 parts like some of the other videos. So for now I'll pause here and I'll continue on with part 2 of chapter 7, How Allah Killed Science, according to Robert Spencer.